All right, so today we're going to be tackling something pretty heavy.
Yeah,
We're looking at rape laws in India.
it's a big one.
Yeah, it is, and it's something that a listener specifically asked us to take a deep dive into, and it's definitely a sensitive topic.
For sure, and a complex one too.
Exactly. So
Huh.
we're going to try to, really understand the legal side of things,
Right.
how society plays into it, and all the talk about what needs to
Yeah,
change.
all the reforms and stuff.
Yeah, and looking at the stuff you sent over, I mean, there's some pretty interesting stuff.
Oh, yeah, some really insightful sources in there, articles, legal analysis, and even like personal stories, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I got to say, I was pretty surprised by something I learned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so apparently the way India legally defines rape is like really specific, and it's actually causing a lot of controversy.
Yeah, that's right. You're talking about Section 375 of the Indian Penal Code,
Okay.
which is like the main law about rape there. And the thing is, it says that rape is something a man does to a woman.
So hold on, does that mean like legally a woman can't rape a man in India?
Well, that's a key point that people are debating.
Yeah.
The law, as it stands right now, doesn't see male rape as a separate crime.
Huh.
We'll get into that a bit later, but yeah, it's a big gap.
Yeah, for sure.
But to really get why the definition is like this, we gotta look back in time.
Okay.
Ancient Indian texts like the Manusmriti had a big impact on how people saw women.
Right.
And those ideas, unfortunately, kind of stuck around even when the British were in charge and made these laws official back in the 1860s.
So what you're saying is the law we see today is basically based on these old ideas about gender roles.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's fascinating to see how history shapes things.
Yeah, but also kind of worrying,
Totally. It makes you think about whether those old views still make sense in India today.
For sure. And that leads us to like all the changes people are talking about.
Yeah, the reforms.
Exactly. India's rape laws have gone through some big updates, especially after that horrible Nirbhaya case back in 2013.
Right, that case was a turning point.
It was awful.
Yeah, it really shook the nation and it led to the Criminal Law Amendment Act.
Okay.
They made a lot of changes, like they expanded what counts as rape. It's not just penetration anymore.
Right.
Punishments got tougher and they added stuff about rape in the armed forces.
So the laws are stricter now, which seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
But here's what I don't get. There are still tons of rape cases in India.
Yeah,
And the number of people actually getting convicted is super low.
right.
So are tougher laws not really the answer?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Stricter laws are important, but they're only one part of a much bigger problem.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff going wrong in the system that stops justice from being served.
Right.
Like a lot of victims can't even get their cases registered with the police.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes the police just don't want to file an FIR.
What's an FIR?
It stands for First Information Report. It's basically the first step to start an investigation.
Okay.
But for a lot of victims, it's a huge roadblock.
So you're saying just getting the case started can be a nightmare?
Sadly, yeah, it's a harsh reality for many. And even when they do manage to file an FIR, the investigations themselves can be messed up.
Like how?
Evidence gets handled poorly. There's corruption in the police force and just general incompetence.
Wow.
All of that makes it harder to get a conviction.
That's awful.
Yeah, and there was that awful Hathras case in 2020.
Oh, yeah, I remember that
A
one.
young woman died after a brutal gang rape, and the police were accused of messing with evidence and dragging their feet.
It was a total mess.
Exactly, and that hurt the chances of getting justice.
It's so disheartening to hear about all these failures, especially when you think about what the victims are going through.
Yeah, it's tragic.
And it's not just the police, right?
No, you're right.
I read somewhere that the courts are super backed up
Yep.
and cases take forever.
Exactly. The Indian judicial system is totally overloaded.
Right.
There are huge backlogs and cases just crawl through the system. Imagine being a victim and having to wait years, sometimes even decades, for your case to be resolved.
Oh, God, that's awful.
It's like they're being victimized all over again, having to keep reliving that trauma while the legal process just drags on and on.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's not just small cases, even high-profile ones like Nirbhaya, which everyone was watching closely, that still took over 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Unbelievable.
It makes you think, are stricter laws even working if the system is so broken?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It raises the question, should we be focusing on just making punishments harsher, or should we be fixing the system itself?
It sounds like both are important.
Absolutely. And that brings us to this whole debate about how effective stricter punishments really are.
Yeah, I mean, if the chances of getting caught are so low, does it even matter how harsh the punishment is?
Exactly. And one of the things you sent me was some research by Madhumita Pandey.
Oh, right.
She interviewed a bunch of convicted rapists in Tihar jail. And what's interesting is a lot of them didn't seem to get how serious their actions were or what the legal consequences could be.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't like they were trying to ignore the law. It was more like they just didn't connect their actions with the potential punishment.
Hmm. That's surprising. I always assumed that harsher punishments would scare people off.
Yeah, it seems logical, but this research suggests it's more complicated than that.
So it's not just about being tough, it's about making people understand the gravity of their actions.
Right, and that brings up a really important question. If stricter laws alone aren't the answer, what else can we do to make sure sexual violence isn't tolerated?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we need to move beyond just reacting to these horrific events and start preventing them from happening in the first place.
Exactly.
That's a big topic, though.
It is.
We'll definitely need to dig into that more in the next part of this deep dive.
For sure, there's a lot more to unpack.
So we were saying we need more than just laws. What else can we do to actually get to the root of this problem and create a culture in India where there's more respect and consent?
Well, one thing that kept coming up in those sources you sent is education.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We need to start teaching kids early about consent, respect, healthy relationships.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And not just like the basic biology stuff.
Hmm.
We need comprehensive sex education that tackles things like power dynamics, gender stereotypes, how to communicate in those situations.
I'm totally with you on that. I feel like so many problems come from people just not understanding those things.
Right.
If we can change the way we talk about sex and relationships, give young people the tools to navigate all that, that can make a huge difference in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's not just schools, right?
Yeah, sure.
The media has a huge impact on how people see sexual violence.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We need responsible reporting that doesn't sensationalize things and that focuses on facts and respects the victims.
I've seen how media coverage can either make things worse or actually help people understand.
Totally. It's a powerful tool.
It really is. And it needs
Yeah.
to be used the right way.
Yeah.
But it's not all about preventing these things from happening, right?
Right.
We also have to make sure victims get the support they need to heal and to seek justice.
Absolutely. They need access to mental health resources, legal aid, safe spaces where they can report what happened and try to get justice.
Yeah, we need to create an environment where they feel supported and strong enough to come forward.
Exactly. And where they don't feel ashamed or scared to seek help because of the stigma.
It breaks my heart to think of how many victims suffer in silence because of that.
Yeah, it's serious.
We need to break down those barriers and make sure they know they're not alone and that there is help out there.
Absolutely. And speaking of breaking down barriers, we can't talk about rape in India without talking about male rape.
It's true. It's something that doesn't get talked about enough, and there's so much stigma around it.
Exactly. And as we said earlier, the law in India doesn't even recognize male rape as a separate crime.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
So male victims have to train use Section 377 of the IPC, which is about unnatural offenses.
Which doesn't really cover it right.
No, it wasn't made for that, and it often doesn't help male victims get justice.
That just seems so wrong. But beyond the law, what kind of impact does this have on male victims?
I mean, the biggest thing is the stigma.
Right.
It's incredibly hard for men to come forward and report these crimes. They're afraid of being seen as weak or not manly enough.
Yes, society puts so much pressure on them.
Exactly. And there's the worry that people think they're gay or question their sexuality, and there aren't many support services specifically for them.
It's like they're being silenced by society and by this lack of understanding.
Exactly. And that silence has consequences. One of the sources you sent was a survey by Injia Dariwala,
Yeah.
and it found that a huge percentage of men who are sexually abused never tell anyone.
Wow, that's awful.
It is, and it makes it harder to get accurate numbers on how often this is happening, which makes it harder to advocate for change.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, the lack of recognition leads to underreporting, which makes it harder to push for better laws and support systems.
Exactly. And it shows that we need a way more inclusive approach to tackling rape in India, one that considers everyone's experiences, no matter their gender.
I couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond just reacting to these terrible events and start focusing on solutions that get to the root of the problem.
And it's not just about stricter laws. It's about changing attitudes and creating a culture where respect, equality, and consent are actually practiced, not just talked about.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening for me. It's clear that there's no quick fix here.
Right.
Addressing rape in India means changing how people think and act, both individually and as a society.
You got it. And what we've discussed today is just the start.
Yeah, it's like opening a door to more exploration, more thinking, more
Mhm.
action. And, it strikes me that we've been talking a lot about big institutions and systems.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, change starts with each of us.
Hmm.
It's about what we do individually, how we treat each other, the conversations we have, the actions we take that all shapes the culture we live in. It feels like we just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
But we did hit on some key points about the challenges and what could help.
Right.
And what really stuck with me is that we can't just wait for things to change on their own.
Yeah.
We all have a part to play in making sure sexual violence isn't tolerated.
Absolutely. It starts with each of us, looking
Right.
at our own biases, getting informed, and speaking up when we see harmful attitudes.
Yeah, and we can support those organizations doing the work on the ground
Yeah.
and push for better laws and support systems.
Right. And even those everyday things matter, like
Yeah.
having honest conversations with people we know.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by how big this problem is
For sure.
and think that what we do as individuals doesn't matter, but it does.
It really does.
Culture is shaped by what we all do and believe.
Yeah.
So if enough of us change how we think and act, that can create a ripple effect.
Exactly. It's about reaching that tipping point where enough people are dedicated to making a safer and more just world.
Yeah, a critical mass.
And knowledge is key. The more we understand about these issues, the better we can challenge the way things are and push for real change.
So to our listener out there, we've looked at the laws, the
Mm.
societal stuff, the challenges, and the possible solutions.
Hmm.
We've covered some really heavy and tough stuff. But here's what I want you to remember.
Yeah.
You're not powerless. You have a voice.
Yeah.
You have the ability to act, and you can make a difference.
And don't be afraid to ask those tough questions,
All right.
Have those uncomfortable conversations and demand more from our leaders and institutions.
Exactly. Change takes time,
Yeah.
but it starts with each of us deciding to be part of the solution.
Well said.
This has been a really insightful deep dive, and I want to thank you, the listener, for suggesting this topic. It was important to explore this.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Remember, knowledge is power, and by understanding these issues, we're taking a step towards positive change. Keep those questions coming.